Hello everyone. We are continuing today with day 10, Sefer Chafetz Chaim. With the help of God, we are going to start with the negative commandments. So the Chafetz Chaim is going to enumerate 17 prohibitions. So he's going to cite 17 verses that one violates when one speaks Lashon Hara, negatively about, not necessarily Lashon Hara, also Rechilut. When just in general, speaking negatively about a fellow Jew, when one speaks either Lashon Hara or Rechilut, and not necessarily that a person violates all 17 when one speaks negatively about a fellow Jew, because, for example, some just apply if you speak negatively about your parent, or if you speak negatively about a orphan or a Kohen, or different applications, and so forth. So the Chafetz Chaim will. This is what we are going to be focusing on for the next 7 days. The negative commandments. I'm going to list the positive commandments that one violates. Okay. So the Chafetz Chaim begins with a basic prohibition against speaking Rechilut and Lashon Hara. Before we continue, it's important to note that Lashon Hara and Rechilut are not identical, and that's why the Chafetz Chaim split his Sefer into two books, Hilchot Lashon Hara and Hilchot Rechilut. Lashon Hara, literally bad speech, is when you say something negative about a person or relate something that may cause him harm or distress. And the Chafetz Chaim actually defined these things earlier in the introduction. We went through them, but just to remind ourselves again. So Lashon Hara is when you speak negatively about another person, or relating something that may cause him harm or distress. Rechilut, gossip, is causing discord, strife, between two people, by telling by telling the person that you're saying, the hearer, that he was disparaged or harmed by so and so. For example, Ruvain tells Shimon that Levi said something bad about Shimon. So because Reuven said this, now there's strife and discord between Shimon and Levi. Okay. So we're gonna continue. We're gonna start. One who gossips about his fellow transgresses a negative commandment. Shene'emar, as it is stated in Vayikra chapter 19, verse 16, Lo telech rachil ba'amecha, do not go as a talebearer, rachil, among your nation. Ezehu rachil, who is a talebearer? Ze sheto'en dvarim ve'olech mizeh lazeh ve'omer. The term rachil generally means a peddler, and here this is a reference to someone, for example, Ruvain, who peddles negative information by going from one person, for example, Shimon, and says to him, Kach amar ploni alecha, so and so Levi, right? Levi said the following negative thing about you, i.e. Shimon. In this case, Ruvain is the peddler. Kach v'kach shamati al ploni shehu oselecha, or Ruvain said to Shimon, I hear that so and so Levi did the following harmful thing to you, and in this manner Ruvain causes strife between Shimon and Levi. Ruvain is called a rachil, a talebearer, and he is in violation of this negative commandment to not go about as a rachil. And it's important to note that the verse says, do not go out as a rachil. So the Shloah Kodesh, the Rabbi Levi Horowitz, says that that one violates the commandment even if one is just walking for the purpose of relating rechilut or lashon hara. So even though he doesn't eventually, so just even walking to relate something negative is prohibited. Afal pi shehu emet, even though what Reuven says about Levi is true. Harezeh machriv et haolam he has still violated the prohibition against speaking rechilut, and by doing so, he is destroying the world. So right now, the Chafetz Chaim is talking about rechilut, gossip. He goes to someone, says that so-and-so said something about you, and it causes strife between the two people. Okay. So the Chafetz Chaim continues that he adds that this verse not only refers to rechilut, but also to lashon hara. And there is a machloket in the poskim. Ramban doesn't include lashon hara amongst the prohibited things in this verse. However, others, the Yerushalmi, the Rambam, the Smag, do say. Okay, but that is aside. V'yesh o avon gadol mizeh ad me'od. There is yet another sin that is far worse than this, i.e. rechilut. V'chu lashon hara, and this is lashon hara. Lashon hara is far worse than rechilut. V'chu beklal lav zeh. And it too is included in this prohibition. Do not go about as a talebearer. So, why, before we continue, it's important to know why is lashon hara worse than rechilut. And there are various explanations, and one explanation that even says the opposite. One explanation is that the potential for violating the sin of lashon hara is much greater. When Reuven speaks rechilut about, he causes strife just between two people, right? Shimon and Levi. Lashon hara, however, you say something negative about someone, and it tends to spread. So not just two people will know the negative, will be in strife. I mean, negative information about Levi, for example, will spread to many people, and this is why lashon hara is worse. Another explanation is lashon hara is talking about negative information, while rechilut is not necessarily negative. So, for example, if Levi, he voted against something that Shimon proposed, right? He proposed some building project, and Levi voted against it. And then Reuven goes to Shimon and says that Levi voted against him. And although this is not negative information, it will cause ill feelings of Shimon towards Levi. And there's nothing negative. Assuming, however, Levi didn't vote, he voted with a good reason behind this vote. And there are other explanations, and then even the Ravid, he says that it's the opposite, that rechilut is worse than lashon hara, but that is separate. So continue. The sin of lashon hara refers to one who speaks disparagingly about his fellow to others, afal pi she'omer emet, and it applies even if the speaker is speaking the truth. And as we will continue with this work, the Chafetz Chaim repeatedly says that speaking negatively about someone applies even if it's the truth, right? And the reason why this is so is because of the definition of lashon hara. The Rambam writes, his commentary to Pirkei Avot, that lashon hara is the imparting of negative information about a person and his shortcomings, and the diminishing of a person's status by noting any type of defect from which he may suffer. So lashon hara does not refer to a case in which one speaks falsely about another person by attributing to him something that he had not done. In that case, when you say something false, say something mean that is false. For example, I say that this person, he stole something, even though he didn't. In this case, this would be motzei shem ra, and this literally means one who puts forth false rumors. Lashon hara, however, is almost always where one dispraises another person about improper things that he has in fact done. So there is a misconception for some reason, and the Chafetz Chaim it reiterates this importantly, that lashon hara is almost always, it always applies when it is true. So that is why he reiterates this, because we're going to encounter this a lot. So the Chafetz Chaim continues introduces a third category of forbidden speech included in this verse, right? We just went through rechilut and lashon hara. The Chafetz Chaim includes a third category. Aval omer sheker. However, if one relates false information about another person, he is deemed to be a motzei shem ra. I already defined it. Is literally one who puts out false rumors about his fellow, and his sin is even greater. And so that is the end of the first safe. So Chafetz Chaim cited the first verse, the first negative prohibition, and a person violates it if one speaks rechilut, lashon hara, or motzi shem ra. And as we said before this, we said in the Agdama, the Pticha, that the structure of how these negative commandments and its laws are going to go. In the Chafetz Chaim, he wrote 8 possible variables or modes for each of the commandments. And in this case, this commandment, right, the eight modes are: if one speaks lashon hara, rechilut, if the person you're speaking negatively about is present or absent, if the speaker or the listener violates it, and if you violate it, if it's the truth or it's false. So in this case, in all these above modes, a person violates it. If one speaks lashon hara, rechilut, if one speaks it in the presence of the victim or not in the presence, if you're a speaker. However, if the listener of someone who speaks lashon hara or rechilut or anything negative, does not violate this commandment, i.e., do not go as a talebearer among your people. However, all the other 8 modes, and I will include a picture of the chart so you guys can look at it and understand it better, because I don't think I explained it too well. Anyways, so now moving on to Sif 2. The Chafetz Chaim cites the second prohibition that refers to both lashon hara and rechilut. However, whereas the previous verse refers only to the speaker, right? Only the speaker violates it and not the listener. The following prohibition applies to the listener as well. However, nami המספר על מקבל בלאו דלא תעשה שמה שווה. One who speaks or accepts lashon hara also violates the prohibition: do not accept the false report. This is in Sefer Shmos, chapter 23. Pasuk 1. So tisa literally means accept. So the verse prohibits a person to listen to and to accept lashon hara or rechilut report. And you might be thinking, it says do not accept the false report. Well, what if the report is true? So in that case, there are different explanations, and some explanations say that any repulsive or disgusting speech, any negative speech, even if it's true, can be called false, and it has neither substance nor basis, and it contains nothing positive. So lashon hara and rechilut can thus be called false, even when the speaker account is technically true. Okay, we continue. V'karei bei nami lo tasi. However, the Gemara in Psachim 118a teaches that the word tisa could be exegetically valued as tasi, which is pronounced sasi, meaning cause to accept. Ve'im kain lav ze kolel l'shnehem. Consequently, this prohibition includes both the listener and the speaker. So for a while, the listener is the one who accepts the report, the speaker is the one who caused the listener to accept the report, and therefore he also violates this. So in the case of the 8 modes, all the 8 modes are applicable. So if one speaks lashon hara or rechilut in the presence of the victim, in the absence of the victim, if the person is the speaker or the listener to the false report, or if the report is true or false, in all cases one violates this commandment of do not accept the false report. And that is the end of today. We're going to continue B'ezrat Hashem tomorrow. Thank you very much for listening.